Welcome. We are resuming our Bible study. Hopefully, we'll do these weekly, and there's just a few times that I'm out of town, and I'll let you know those times that we're not doing it. But this will be on Wednesdays at 6:30. Start with prayer. Heavenly King, Comforter, the Spirit of Truth, present in all places and filling all things, the treasury of blessings and the giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us of every stain, and save our souls, O good one. Amen. So, as I announced, we are going to be doing First Maccabees. It is part of the Orthodox Bible. It is part of the Roman Catholic Bible, the Vulgate. It is not part of the Masoretic text. And so if you have any other Western version of the Bible, it will not be there. And so a lot of people don't actually know about that. Well, I'm not going to say why, but we're going to discover why it was taken out of the Jewish text after Christ, but I think it'll become clear as we go through the text here that as to why it was taken out. But to start with Maccabees, we kind of have to, it is a history book. So it being a history book, we have to talk about history. And previous Bible studies we have gone through, we started in Genesis, we started at the beginning, we've gone through the Torah, we've gone through the kingdoms and all that. But we kind of ended, last historical part of it was basically the deportation to Babylon. When Israel collapsed, the Persians took the Israelites to Babylon. And so to have an understanding of that, we have to understand kind of what happened between that time and the timing of when Maccabees is being reported. The first book was actually probably written about 100 BC, 100 years before Christ. But the events are basically 60 years, 70 years before that. So we're talking about a 300-year period from roughly the 5th century BC to the 2nd century BC. So we're going to talk about a place that's not part of Palestine or Israel. We're going to talk about Greece. Because you have to talk about Greece, because the Persians are the ones that have taken over, have conquered Palestine, but they didn't stop there. They continued up into modern-day Turkey, Asia Minor, and then into Greece. And so we have the very famous, before we get to that point, no, I'm sorry. We have the famous wars, the Persian wars with the Greeks, Sparta, the 300, that whole history. We won't go into all that. We should at least have some understanding of that. But the Greeks, Athens did fall eventually, but basically they didn't have really enough influence over Greece to really control it. And so the Persians went back to Babylon. And what happens then is, in Greek history, is the Peloponnesian Wars. Athens and Sparta mostly. There's a lot of other Greek cities that got involved with that. But those are the two main proponents, which really kind of weakened Greece a lot. They were city-states. It was not really, they call themselves Hellenes, not Greeks, but Hellenes. But they were city-states. They were independent. They weren't really a unified whole. So after 60 roughly years, from roughly 460 BC to 404 BC, you have these wars that are taking place in the Peloponnesus and other places, Carthage, Syracuse, and some of these other places as well. Anyway, eventually they get to a point where they realize there's still a threat, an existential threat in Persia, among other places. And instead of warring amongst each other, it might be a good idea for us to have a unified country, because if we're dealing with the Persians again, fighting separately is not going to be beneficial. Even the Battle of Thermopylae, we talk about 300 Spartans. There's like 3,000 troops, some of them from Athens, some of them from other places as well. But ultimately what happens is Macedonia, which is north of Greece, Philip is the king there, and he has a pretty good army. He has a new way of fighting using the phalanx, and the Greeks basically band together and say, "You're going to be in charge." Um, and so Philip becomes basically the king of Greece. He lasts what, 3 years?
I think a little more than that.
Not he doesn't last very long, Philip. He gets poisoned. I think by his wife, or one of his
One of them.
one of allegedly allegedly gets poisoned by one of his wives, and his son Alexander takes over. And Alexander fights in a similar manner. He's 23 roughly when he was made
Yeah,
king.
because 33 he dies.
Yeah, so he was a young man. Um, and he is not great yet because he really only has Greece. But he starts his battles and he goes across into modern day Turkey, comes down to Tyre and Sidon, uh, famously conquers the island, which had never been conquered, works his way down through Palestine, conquers that, works his way down into Egypt, becomes Pharaoh, or names himself Pharaoh, uh, but there wasn't anybody to challenge him. So he's now Pharaoh. Um, and then his goal is to conquer the whole world. And so he pushes into Afghanistan, ultimately to the Indus River in India. He conquers Babylon. He conquers the Persians. He becomes king there. He wants to go all the way into China and basically to the Atlantic. But it was roughly, what, 10 years of fighting, you know, and his soldiers said, enough, we're done. And so he's disappointed. But then he dies about 3 years later, um, from numerous things. Lots of people have ideas of why he died, but probably from multiple things. Um, and so this is well, into the 4th century. Okay, so he's in doing all that. What he does is he takes all these different cultures and makes them Hellenes. Greek is learned. That's the common language. So everybody in that area now speaks Greek, and it's not so much it's to unify, but it's not so much to replace per se, but as in able to have a cohesive empire in such a large area. If you traveled from one place to the other, you might be even an Indian, and you go to Egypt. Now, even in today's times, they probably wouldn't communicate very well with each other. They would have to have a common language. Well, Greek is that common language. And it's not just a language, but it's a philosophy. Remember, so, during, previously, you have, the playwrights and the poets and all these things. You have Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides. You have the philosophers, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. I think Alexander learned from Aristotle. Xenophon, Herodotus. So you have all this culture that's also imparted to this entire part of the world. So it's not just the language that we can speak the same, but we now think the same. There's a common identity, if you will. This is important for us as Greek Orthodox, because although many of us have Greek DNA in us, that's really not why we're Greek Orthodox. It has to do with this. It has to do with Hellenism, and it's the way of thinking. This is why we distinguish between Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity, and we can lump Western Christianity into both Catholic and Protestants, whereas Eastern Orthodoxy is just Orthodoxy because we are Hellenes. So that's kind of what has happened here. After Alexander dies, his empire is you gave him. His empire is split into 4 places. He actually separates it into 4 territories. So there's 4 kingdoms that are now, after his death, ruling the four areas of the kingdom. And as is wont to happen with human beings when there's a power opportunity, there's a power grab. Now, after Alexander's death, up until 200 BC, Palestine is under the Ptolemies. Ptolemy was one of the generals, and he was made the king of the Egyptian area. Okay, so the Ptolemies are ruling from Egypt up into Palestine, basically up almost into Turkey. And that's under the Ptolemies for 150 years, roughly, 130 years. So they're ruling for a long time. And under the Ptolemies, there's not a whole lot, there's a lot of freedom. I mean, again, you can be Greek and you can still have your modern, your unique culture and language as well. And then the Seleucids come in, and the Seleucids are from where Persia was, and they're trying to reconquer the empire, if you will. And the Seleucids come in and they conquer Palestine, take it over from the Ptolemies, roughly 200 BC. In doing so, they're not as forgiving of the individual cultures. So they start to make some radical changes, really. From about 198, roughly when they conquered Palestine, to 175, they make a few changes, but by 175, all these things are in place. What happens is Antiochus Epiphanes it becomes the ruler, and he's warring, which costs money. So he takes the Jewish temple, he goes into it, and he takes everything of value, all the gold, the wood, everything of value. He desecrates the temple, takes it out, strips the temple for its wealth. He then makes some cultural changes that the Jews would be very unhappy with. Sorry. One of them is that he banned circumcision. Now, circumcision being how Jews identify themselves, very important thing. So that is the first issue. The second thing that he does is he forbids abstaining from pork being non-kosher. So now Jews have to eat pork. And it's not just that they have to eat pork, but they have to eat pork that's sacrificed to the gods. And he sets up in the temple of Jerusalem a statue of Zeus that he sacrifices the pork to. So he completely desecrates the temple. Okay. And so we're going to get into some of this in Maccabees. But as you can imagine, Jewish people are not very happy. So the tensions are growing between the traditional Jewish culture and monotheism, again, being monotheistic, and the new Greek paganism. Okay. Remember, previously, Alexander didn't mind you staying monotheistic. He didn't have an issue. The Ptolemies didn't have an issue. Those Seleucids are making these changes. And so you can imagine that then a rebellion is going to begin. And as that begins, it kind of creates a fire throughout Palestine where the rebellion grows into what we are going to go through in the book of Maccabees. So that's kind of where this comes about. The Jewish people previously were not required to sacrifice to the gods. You have your own God, fine, you do what you're going to do. Seleucids say no, you must sacrifice to the gods as well. So lots of problematic changes for Jewish people. So
you would think that they might have learned from the guy that they took it from. Because they will hold on to it so easily. They pay their tax, I don't care.
You would think. Didn't happen that way. So when you start to make those kinds of changes, people tend to be upset about it. So there's several books of Maccabees. The first book is written, as I said, about 100 BC. It's written by a Palestinian Jew, so somebody who's a Hebrew, and so he's going to write it from that perspective. It's going to be from a Palestinian Jewish perspective. Other books of Maccabees are from different perspectives. So when we get to those, we'll see a different perspective. Historically, what did I miss? Nothing of import.
The rebellion in Greece when Alexander took over. You
I'm
forgot
sorry,
forgot the rebellion in Greece.
which one?
The one when Philip died. Thebes and Athens went, nah, we're good. And then they got smacked.
No,
and then they
they-
took what?
The Macedonians were too powerful.
Yeah, the Thebes tried to say no, but
Yeah,
it didn't last very long.
the following guy
Yeah,
was overwhelmed.
it was. I mean, and it was it. He had a large army, Alexander did, and Philip did it previous to that, but it didn't require a large army. He could actually destroy a much larger army using the phalanx to.
The way they were fighting.
Yeah.
that's-
It's an impressive style
Yes.
of warfare.
They
And
were
actually,
fighting-
basically,
It was like a
for what they were.
compact.
Yeah, it would be divide and conquer, so it would go punch through the middle and go out. I mean, it was very mobile, where the Persian army was so large there was nowhere to move. And so if you've seen the movie 300, as the Persians are coming in, they're just they're behind their shields.
The Greeks were saying there were so many of them, they were blocking the sun.
Right,
One of the Greeks said, okay,
We'll
we'll
fight
fight
in the
in the
shade.
shade.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, but as the Persians are coming, they're just running into each other, and they're basically killing themselves, and while the phalanx is just stationary. So this is what we're talking about now. Remember, then, the Seleucids are still Greeks. They're still fighting with the same style that Alexander was fighting with. So this is kind of um, a bit of a turning point in Greek history, if you will. It's where the empire starts to crumble a little bit, and where this is also where later on Rome is able to kind of start to come in and do their business. So all that background was important to get into where we are now, because they're going to allude to a lot of that, and if we don't have some of the background, it just kind of assumes, because again, this was written 100 BC. It just assumes all these things, right? Because it wasn't that long ago. So we will begin with First Maccabees chapter 1, and go through and read a little bit of this. After Alexander, the son of Philip the Macedonian, came out of the land of Kittim and conquered Macedonia, and defeated Darius, the king of the Persians, and the Medes, and reigned in his place, he was already king of Greece. He then fought numerous wars, conquered fortresses, and slaughtered the kings of the earth. He went to the ends of the earth and took the spoils of many nations, so the earth rested from war before him, and he was exalted. His heart was likewise encouraged. He formed a mighty army and ruled countries, nations, and princes, and they all paid taxes to him. And so basically what it's saying is, once he stopped warring, there was kind of peace. It wasn't the Pax Romana, but there was kind of peace in the land. Everybody was kind of going about their business. Then later he fell sick, and he knew he was dying. So he brought in his trusted servants who had grown up with him from childhood, and parceled out his kingdom to them while he was still living. After Alexander reigned for 12 years, death claimed him. Then his servants began to rule, each in his appointed place. They all put on crowns after he died, and their sons for many years after them, and the evils they caused multiplied on the earth. So as I said, split into 4 areas. They become kings, and typically kings want more land, and so there was problems. A sinful root came forth from them. Antiochus Epiphanes, the son of Antiochus the king, who was a hostage in Rome. He began his reign in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. So it's not exactly in reference to BC AD. Okay, it's a different timeline there. In those days, lawless men came forth from the sons of Israel, and they persuaded many, saying, let us make a covenant with the Gentiles surrounding us. For ever since we were separated from them, many evils have found us. This proposal found favor in their eyes, and some of the people eagerly desired to enter into this agreement. So they went to the king, and he gave them authority to observe the ordinances of the Gentiles. Then they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the customs of the Gentiles, and made themselves as the uncircumcision. So they fell away from the holy covenant, yoked themselves to the Gentiles, and sold themselves to do evil. So, alluded to those changes, the cultural changes that the Jewish people left following the law and started following the Greek ways of doing things, even to the point of not circumcising their children, but even worse and kind of gruesome, the men who were circumcised made themselves no longer circumcised. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Enough of a visual, but yeah, not something that most people would sign up for.
Would
So-
that be if one was
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
What was that?
a eunuch?
Could have been a eunuch, or could have just,
Ah, okay.
yeah,
I got just enough to get confirmation.
yeah. It doesn't go into great detail for a reason. So, verse 16. Thus the kingdom was prepared before Antiochus, and he determined he would reign over the land of Egypt, so as to rule over two kingdoms. Thus he entered Egypt with a strong multitude of chariots, elephants, cavalrymen, and a large army. He engaged Ptolemy, king of Egypt, in battle, and Ptolemy turned from him in shame and fled. Many were wounded and fell, so they captured mighty cities in Egypt, and Antiochus took spoils in the land of Egypt. So the Seleucids, who were in the area of Persia, have now conquered a second of, half of Alexander's empire, and now rule in Egypt, which of course was all Palestine being under Egypt during that time. After he conquered Egypt in 143rd year, Antiochus turned and went up to Israel and Jerusalem with a large army. He entered the sanctuary in arrogance and took the golden altar and lampstand, all the utensils, the table of presentation, the cups and bowls, the golden censers, the curtain, the crowns, and the golden ornaments on the face of the temple. He stripped everything and took the silver and the gold and everything costly and the hidden treasures he found. Taking all these things, he departed for his own land. He committed deeds of murder and spoke with great arrogance. There was great mourning everywhere in Israel. Rulers and elders groaned, virgins and young men grew weak, and the beauty of the women was altered. Every bridegroom took up a lament and sat mourning in his bridal chamber. The land was shaken for its inhabitants, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. Okay, so we talked about that. He stripped the temple, desecrated the temple, and then took all the riches and went home. So, and left them, of course, with new rules to follow. So, so after 2 years, the king sent a revenue official to the cities of Judah, and he entered Jerusalem with a large army. Antiochus spoke peaceable words to them with deceit, and they believed him. Then he fell upon the city suddenly, struck it a great blow, and killed many people from Israel. He took spoils from the city, set it on fire, and tore down its houses and the city walls. They took captive the women and the children and took possession of the animals. It is important to note that, when in those days in particular, when an army did that, it's not just the wealth that they took with them, they took the people as well. They took, so I mean, they're leaving some people there, but they're taking who they want. Many of them become soldiers in the new army, etc. Then they built the city of David with a great and strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. So they're not using the holy city to honor God, but to house soldiers and armaments and things like that. They placed there a sinful nation of lawless men, and they became strong within it. And they laid up weapons and provisions and gathered together the spoils they had taken from Jerusalem. Then they returned there and were like a great snare. It became an ambush against the sanctuary, an evil accuser against Israel continually. They shed innocent blood around the sanctuary and defiled the sanctuary. The inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, and she became a dwelling place of strangers. She became a stranger to her offspring, and her children forsook her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a desert, and her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into a disgrace, and her honor into contempt. Her dishonor prevailed against her glory, and her high position was turned into mourning. Okay, so again, all the things we kind of have gone through a little bit. Verse 41, then the king wrote to all his kingdom that they all were to be as one people. And so again, when I mentioned, Alexander's intention to have the Hellenism be a unifying thing, it still allowed for freedom amongst individual freedom and cultures. Antiochus is saying, no, nobody has individual freedom. You're all going to follow the same thing. And that was his vision of unity, was to eliminate anything that was foreign or different. The king, we talked about that. So all the nations accepted the word of the king. Many from Israel also thought it good to serve him. So they sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. Okay, so we're talking about now breaking basically all the 10 commandments, not just the lower ones, the smaller ones, but all the commandments. Then the king sent books to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah by the hand of messengers and told them to follow foreign customs in the land, to forbid whole burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane the Sabbaths and the feasts, and to defile the sanctuary and the holy ones. These books also told them to build altars, sacred precincts, and temples to idols, to sacrifice swine and common animals, to leave their sons uncircumcised, so they would corrupt their souls by every unclean and profane thing, and forget the law, and alter all the ordinances. They also added that whoever did not obey the word of the king would die. So if we go back to the kingdoms, that was the problem, right? As soon as Israel gets a king, you're not supposed to have a king because God is the king. But we give a king now, they start to fall away from God and stop following the law. Similar thing here is happening, but it's not the Jews doing it intentionally per se. It's the outside influence of the Greeks here that is causing them to fall away. 51, according to all these words, he wrote to everyone in his kingdom. He also placed inspectors over all the people and commanded the cities of Judah to sacrifice in each and every city. Thus, many of the people, everyone who forsook the law, joined together and did evil things in the land, and they forced Israel to hide in every place of refuge they had. So, 54, then on the 15th day of Shislev in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation on the altar of the whole burnt offerings and built altars in the surrounding cities of Judah. So that's the statue of Zeus in the Jewish temple that's on the altar there. So desecrated the altar. They also burned incense at the doors of houses and in the streets. And when they found books of the law, they tore them to pieces and burned them in the fire. Whenever a book of the covenant was found in someone's possession, or if anyone sympathized with the law, the judgment of the king was to kill him. They acted with their might against Israel, against those who were found month after month in the cities. Then on the 25th day of the month, they sacrificed on the altar, which was on top of the altar of the whole burnt offerings. In keeping with the decree, they sentenced to death the women who had their children circumcised and the families who had circumcised them, and hung the infants from their mothers' necks. Yet many in Israel grew strong and determined in themselves not to eat unclean things. They chose rather to die than be defiled by foods or profane the holy covenant. So they died, and great wrath came upon Israel. So Israel is now under occupation, and some people are choosing martyrdom. Some people are choosing to follow the new culture and falling away from Israel. So you can imagine what's humanity's response to these sorts of things. This isn't just an Israel thing. This is when people do that. What's the response?
Resist, fight,
resist and fight. You can tax anything in the colonies, just don't tax our tea, right? You know. So
We just want to tax too far. Like, no, no, no.
well, the funny thing is, and living in Tennessee now, they taxed wheat. Why did they tax wheat? Not for the bread, for the bourbon.
Oh,
And colonies were like, no problem.
That's understandable. We'll drink.
The tea, that's a problem. So interesting, but anyway,
It was an import item.
yeah. Well, so so that sets the stage for how Israel is going to respond. Chapter 2. In those days, Mattathias, the son of John of the tribe of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Jorah, rose up from Jerusalem and settled in Modin. He had 5 sons: John called Gadi, Simon called Thasi, Judas called Maccabees, Eleazar called Averon, and Jonathan called Apphus. So he's kind of giving you the idea. The 2 names are the Jewish name and the Seleucid name, the new hungry name. So they had 2 names. Okay. And so Maccabeus, Judas Maccabeus, Judas being the Hebrew name, Maccabeus means the hammer. So he was Jude the hammer. And so each of them had their 2 names. He saw the blasphemies taking place in Judah and Jerusalem and said, Alas, why was I born to see this, the ruin of my people, the destruction of the holy city, and to live there when it was delivered into the hands of the enemy, the sanctuary into the hand of foreigners. Her temple has become like a man without honor. Her glorious vessels were carried away into captivity. Her infants have been slain in the streets, her young men with the sword of the enemy. What nation has not inherited her palaces and taken hold of her spoils? All her adornment has been removed. In place of freedom, she has become a slave. And behold, our sanctuary, our beauty and our glory have been laid waste, and the Gentiles have desecrated it. Why should we live any longer? Thus Mattathias and his sons tore their clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned exceedingly.
Wouldn't this be something that usually happens after Israel has been disobedient?
You-
We would be very consistent in the history. So it's like, what was going on before this had to happen to them, or where?
The influence of the Gentiles, when you're living as a minority in a dominant society, you tend towards those dominating features.
Mm-hmm.
And so Israel, it wasn't in mass, but Israel was starting to be lax in their faith. So yes, they were already starting to kind of leave.
So
They
they're
got
basically going down like as if they were dealing with the Canaanites, and this God's like, I already know how this is going to end. Let's just hurry this up.
and so it just it just continued, and so after generations it becomes a lot easier. um you know, Greeks are a good example here in America. Okay, Greeks come over, we build our churches, and what do?
Hold
Looks,
up.
look exactly like every other church in Memphis. We have pews. No pews in Greece. We have organs. There's no organs in Greece. We have choirs. There's no choirs in Greece. The priests wear collars. There's no collars in Greece. You know, some of the priests are clean shaven. Priests wear beards in Greece. So we assimilate a little bit to the culture that was here. And so the Jews are doing that as well. And as they're doing that, they're forsaking the law, which is, of course, is an abomination. And so, yeah, so what you're alluding to is that it becomes easier and easier. Ironically, with the Greeks here, we're starting to move the pendulum back the other way, and people are like, let's get rid of the pews. Fine by me. I don't sit in them, so we don't
that
need
would
the
be
organ.
difficult.
Yeah, you don't need the organ. A lot more Greek Orthodox priests around the country are wearing the cassocks everywhere and having long beards and things. So we're kind of reclaiming our.
So, Father, you're going to grow your beard out?
No. We're kind of reclaiming our identity, if you will. But the culture is, as opposed to the culture here, the culture in America today is receptive to that. When the Greeks came over, they were less receptive. So they're kind of like where this was. It's a normal thing. This is what peoples do. Okay, but this is being forced upon them now. They're basically second class citizens at this point, or third class citizens, if you will. So, but again, I'll use the Greeks as an example. If you lose a generation in the parish, the second, third, fourth generation, that generation tends not to come back, right? They kind of lose their identity within their Greekness and become Americans. And so that's kind of what's happening here with the Jews as well. Alexander died in 323.
320, yeah.
323, and we're talking about 175. So we're talking 6-7 generations of Greek influence. So some of them maintained that, some of them didn't.
This was just continually telling me they would have won.
It was
When were they called Maccabees? When they use that word?
so the reason this is called Maccabees is because the hero of the book is going to be Judas Maccabeus. So we call these Maccabees. The actual family name, which is what the dynasty becomes, is the Hasmonean dynasty. So they're Hasmoneans, but this is called Maccabees after Judas Maccabeus. Okay. Now, we all know who, there's another Judas a couple hundred years later, right? This is why Judas is such a popular name, is because of Judas Maccabeus. He was named after Judas Maccabeus. The Apostle Jude is also a Judas. They're both Judases, okay? But we like to distinguish between the two by calling one Jude and the other one Judas, even though it's the same name. So, but that's why they're named after Judas Maccabeus. So, verse 15. Now those from the king who were enforcing the apostasy journeyed to the city of Modin to make them offer sacrifice. So Mattathias had withdrawn from Jerusalem and gone into the wilderness to avoid having to do all these new regulations and live in peace by himself. The problem is, once the occupying army gets comfortable where they are, they start to go out to the surrounding areas and deal with them. And this is what's happening here.
Here, the first paragraph of 2, when it says Simon called Thasi, it was their new name.
Their new name, their more Greek name. Yeah. So.
That's not Greek to me.
Well,
with the influence, the local influence.
So again, you have to remember this was originally written in Hebrew and translated into the Greek. We don't actually have any of the original Hebrew manuscripts. So it could have been a little bit of a translational issue. I mean, it could be Thanasi, but Thanasi wouldn't have been the name in those days because this is before Jesus. So there is no, but that's kind of their Greek name versus the Jewish name. So again, 15, now those from the king who were enforcing the apostasy journeyed to the city of Modin to make them offer sacrifice, and many from Israel also came with them. So Mattathias and his sons gathered together. Then those from the king spoke to Mattathias, saying, "You are a great and glorious leader in the city, and supported by your sons and brothers. Now come, be the first to follow the decree of the king, as all the Gentiles and the men of Judah have done, and those who remain in Jerusalem, and you and your sons will be among the king's friends, and you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many rewards." So Mattathias clearly was like the mayor of the area. Okay, he had a high position. The Greeks say, if we get this guy to offer sacrifice, everybody else will follow in line, and they try to bribe him to do that. Then Mattathias answered, speaking with a loud voice, Though all the Gentiles in the house of the kingdom of the king obey him, and each turns from the worship of their fathers and chooses to follow his commands. My sons and my brothers and I will continue in the covenant of our fathers. Far be it from us to forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not obey the words of the king to turn aside from our worship to the right or to the left. So he refuses to give in. When he finished saying these words, a Jew came forward in the sight of everyone to sacrifice upon the altar of Modin in accordance with the king's decree. When Mattathias saw him, he was filled with zeal, and his heart trembled and poured forth anger and judgment. Then he ran and slew him upon the altar. So he killed the king's man who wanted to offer sacrifice at that time, and he tore down the altar. Thus he had zeal for the law, just as Phinehas had against Zamri, the son of Salome. So this is an important distinction here. Clearly, he's upset. He's not going to do it. But he sees a fellow Jew apostatizing, and he goes and kills him in the sight of the Greeks. Probably not going to be a good response. Greeks were not expecting that, so they didn't have a large enough army to just put down the unrest at that time. But one will come, surely. But the reference to Phinehas, anybody know what that reference is? So Phinehas saw somebody apostatizing during the kingdoms, and he did the same thing. He went and slew the person with zeal, and God exalted him and made him a priest because he was following the law. And so this is kind of saying that this mirrors what Phinehas did. So Mattathias, his lineage will now be priestly lineage as well. He will have a spiritual leadership as well as other leadership, kind of sort of exalting him as a hero. 27, when Mattathias cried out with a loud voice in the city, saying, "Everyone who has zeal for the law and holds to the covenant, let him follow me." So he and his sons fled to the mountains and left behind whatever they had in the city. So Mattathias is anticipating a strong response. He grabs everybody that wants to save themselves, and they go and hide. The many who sought righteousness and judgment went down to the desert to live there, they, their sons, their women, and their cattle, because evils increased severely against them. It was also announced to the king's men and the soldiers in Jerusalem, the city of David, that certain men who had scattered when the command of the king was made known had gone into hiding in the desert. Thus many ran after them, tracked them down, marched against them, and engaged them in battle on the Sabbath day. So now the king knows that he has a rebellion on his hands, and so he's going to try and squash everybody who's rebelling and battling on the Sabbath. Why is that a problem?
Forbidden.
It's forbidden. Jews can't fight on the Sabbath, so they know. Just wait for Saturday, and you can go and kill them while they're sitting there peacefully. You don't even have to fight them. Then they said to them, "Now come out and do the will of the king, and you shall live." But they answered, "We will not come out, nor will we do the will of the king to desecrate the Sabbath day." So the enemy rushed into the battle against them, yet they did not answer them, nor did they cast a stone, nor did they block up their hiding places, saying, "Let us all die in our innocence. Heaven and earth will testify for us that you destroyed us unjustly." So the king's men rose against them in battle on the Sabbath, and they died along with their women, children, and cattle, as many as 1,000 people. So Modena basically wiped out at that point because they couldn't fight on Sabbath. Then Mattathias and his friends grieved for them exceedingly. So each one said to his neighbor, "If we do as our brothers did and fail to fight against the Gentiles for our life and our ordinances, they will quickly wipe us off the earth." So they resolved on that day, saying, "Every man who comes against us for battle on the Sabbath day, let us war against him, and we shall not all die as our brethren did in their hiding places." So Mattathias and his people say, "Wait a minute. If we don't do something differently here, it's going to be a very short battle." And so they're going to basically break the Sabbath, but for a just cause, if you will. And so should be noted, even though this is not in the current Hebrew scriptures, it was at the time of Jesus. Okay, so they would have been very, very, very familiar with this. Like I said, they named their children after Judas Maccabeus. So they would have known this. So as Jesus is going through and preaching, and what is he doing? He's healing on the Sabbath. The apostles are picking grains on the Sabbath. He's telling the people, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Okay, what is he referring to? Judas Maccabeus. He's saying, yes, I'm breaking the Sabbath, but I'm doing it for a just cause. It's not an unjust cause. It's just not willy-nilly. So the people in Jesus's time are seeing this happen, and they're very clearly reminded of this situation. Okay. 42, then the synagogue of the Hasidians gathered with them a mighty army from Israel, everyone who willingly offered himself for the law. Everyone who escaped from evils was added to them and became their support. So they formed an army and struck the sinners in their wrath and the lawless men in their anger. The rest fled to the Gentiles to be rescued. Mattathias and his allies also surrounded the altars and tore them down, and they circumcised the uncircumcised boys by force, as many as they found in the mountains of Israel. Thus they pursued the sons of arrogance, and the undertaking prospered in their land. They took the law out of the hand of the Gentiles and the king, and did not allow the sinners to dominate them. So now we have a full-fledged rebellion. Mattathias collects anybody who's willing to follow the law. He's killing any Jewish person who is not willing to follow the law. And if you're able to escape, they run to the Gentiles and join them. And he's gaining his army. Now, I say army, probably not a very large army, at least not in comparison to what they're coming up on, but they are at least, getting some semblance of order. So there's now a pocket of resistance within Jerusalem, and Modin is, maybe say 20 miles or so from Jerusalem. That's not a lot in today's time. That's a few days' journey in those days. So under, probably very difficult terrain. So they have a little bit of security, if you will, because they're far enough away that, they can't just send out the army tomorrow. Then the days approached for Mattathias to die.
No.
And he spoke to his son, saying, now arrogance and the scorn and the time of destruction and the furious anger have been strengthened. Therefore, children, be zealous for the law and offer your lives for the covenant of our fathers, and remember the deeds of our fathers did in their generations, and receive great honor and an everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful in trial, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness? And Joseph, at the time of his trouble, kept the commandment and became the ruler of Egypt. Phinehas, our father, showed true zeal and received a covenant of eternal priesthood. Joshua fulfilled the word and became a judge in Israel. Caleb testified in the assembly and received an inheritance in the land. David, in the mercy shown him, inherited the throne of the kingdom forever. In his great zeal for the law, Elijah was taken up into heaven. Ananias, Azarias, and Mishael believed and were saved from the fiery furnace. In his innocence, Daniel was delivered from the mouth of lions. Thus understand from generation to generation that all who hope in the Lord will not be weak. Do not fear the words of a simple man, because his glory is like manure and worms. Today he will be exalted, but tomorrow he will not be found, for he returned to his dust, and his purpose will perish. Children, be courageous and strong in the law, because you will be honored by it. So Mattathias is just invoking the history of Israel. All of that should be relatively familiar. It's also why, again, after Christ, Council of Jamnia, when the Hebrew scripture was altered and Maccabees was removed, they also removed parts of Daniel, referencing Ananias, Azarias, and Mishael, because, you have to kind of scrub the record, if you will.
When did they start removing those books? Like, when did they make the Masoretic text, and so what book were they taking out?
So the Council of Jamnia was convened by the Jewish leaders in 90 AD. Temple has been destroyed in 70 AD. So 20 years later, and Israel is in disarray, it's in diaspora. They gather the council and they begin to alter the Hebrew scripture, removing essentially 10 books that were part of the scripture already, and portions of other books, mainly Daniel, parts of Jeremiah. Um, and he even wanted to remove Isaiah, but that was just too familiar that they couldn't do that. Um, so, so we're talking 90, by that time, Christianity has become very clearly no longer a Jewish sect. Up to about 60 AD, 70 AD, the Romans just looked at Christians as being, oh, it's another Jewish sect, leave them alone. They're not a big deal. But as there's friction between Christians and Jews, it gets the Romans' attention. Oh, wait a minute. If you're a Jewish sect, why are you so at odds with each other? And then, of course, the temple's destroyed in 70 and very clear delineation by 90. So Council of Jamnia does that. Now, the reason the Masoretic text comes about and it becomes the Western Christian version of the Old Testament is at the Reformation, 1400 years later. Of course, everything from Rome must be bad, including the Bible must be bad. So they instead of saying what was the Old Testament that was in use at the time of Jesus, they go to the Jews at the time in the 15th century and they say, what does your scripture look like? And they give them the updated scripture. And so that's why the Masoretic text is the Western Old Testament that has the 10 books removed, Maccabees being one of them.
Hmm.
So,
This conversation came up recently.
yeah, they didn't go to the original source. They went to the modern source that had been altered.
The Septuagint was done about 300 years before Christ.
Yes, third century, so 250 years or so. So yeah, so it was, and this had been translated into Greek as well. So by that time, so verse 65. So behold, Simeon, your brother, I know he is a man of wisdom. Listen to him every day, and he shall be your father. Judas Maccabeus, mighty in fighting from his youth, he shall be the leader of your army, and he will fight the fight of the people, and you bring forth with you all those who are doers of the law, and seek justice for your people, repay the Gentiles in full, and hold fast to the ordinance of the law. Then he blessed them and was added to his fathers. So he died in the 146th year, and was buried in the tomb of his fathers in Modin, and all of Israel mourned him with great mourning. So Mattathias is no more. And Simeon is now sort of the leader, the governor, if you will, while Judas is the general. So, any questions or follow up?
How does this apply to modern day Europe?
Yes, doesn't change a whole lot. So, in today's times, when you're looking at the modern perspective of how Israel sees themselves, they're behaving in a very similar manner. So,
Why haven't the Jews expanded upon their writings? Like that, it's like since then they don't seem to have ever. They removed books, but they have not added anything.
they haven't added any scripture, but they do add, and they continue to interpret the law. So they have the Talmud and some other writings that are modern day writings.
So they don't have any more stories. They don't add no stories to it.
They have no
expanded.
They have no scripture per se. So,
Will that not be a sign that there's no progression? Because ever since then, 15, almost 2,000 years, you guys really haven't added anything. You have
right.
a few thousand years of adding all kinds of stuff, and suddenly you guys are just blank.
Right. Well, but I mean, they're still interpreting it. So it's rabbinical now, and so there's interpretation, and so it's a fractured entity. I mean, and so to give you an idea, right? You can't cook on the Sabbath, right? You can't cook on Saturday. So a good Jewish guy came up with the idea that, well, we'll just have timers. So we'll have the thing in the oven and we'll set the timer on Friday and let it go. And at the right time, bing, it's ready. Didn't cook. Perfectly within the law. There's actually, there's, if you want to look into it, there's actually some very funny things on how that the loopholes that the Jewish people have created for the law. It's very creative and interesting. I won't get into too much detail there, but
So would it have that to do with canon, what he's talking about? Like, maybe their canon is closed, and that's why they haven't added any more scripture.
People, how would they be able to justify that?
I
Like
mean,
they've gone through so many years and they were constantly adding something. Now they don't even have the stories of their modern Exodus per se, and then the return back to it. They have nothing added to it.
maybe it could be because it's not considered history, so
Yeah.
therefore it's not part of the canon. Maybe because to some extent they have grown far from God, so therefore, well, we would add something. Like when you look at Israel, you could say that they have apostatized, right? So it could be canon, like their canon, like their scripture based. Like if we look at our canon, right? For example, the Protestants have a different one than
Yeah.
the Orthodox have, right? So for a Protestant, their canon is closed. We will not add any more books, and any more books that are added will have to pass a historical text for them to be added. So they will have to go through a process of, well, will have to be written between this century and this century in order for us to add it to the canon. Anything that is after those centuries, they will have to be historically proven that they were in between that set of time. That's how the canon works, if that makes sense. At least
But it's kind of like also like we had a good World War II, nearly get wiped out a good second, and then they had the big return back to Israel. I am surprised they haven't tried to put anything in there talking about their expand and then the return,
So-
the founding, and so on and so forth.
part of the issue is the destruction of the temple kind of ended their history because there has not been a sacrifice offered in Israel since 70 AD. They are waiting to rebuild the temple in order for that to happen. So it's kind of like the temple, and you have to understand, why is the temple so important? Where is God for us? Everywhere.
Everywhere.
We're the temple. We pray to the Holy Spirit is filling all things everywhere. God is anywhere. He can be anywhere, right? Where is God for the Jewish people? In the temple. He has an address. He is in one place. God has not resided there since 70 AD. So there is no history. Because God is not there, which is a problem. It's not the first time it happened. Deportation to Babylon was the first time that God was no longer, the ark was no longer in Jerusalem. It was in Babylon. And that's where Ezekiel comes in, and the prophet comes from Babylon and takes his chariot. That's kind of a formative time in Israel's history. So it's not that God is dead. It's not that God is gone. He's just not on his throne. He's not in his temple yet. They are trying to rebuild the temple. And there's some problems there, but which is why they have not rebuilt the temple since they've regained the land. But that's part of the issue of their story. They're still writing the story, and it's not complete, so that's why they haven't put it in yet.
Okay.
So, yeah, the temple is very, very important, which is, again, this is what Judas or Mattathias was doing, right? He was destroying all the other temples because there's only one temple. And right now it's being occupied by the Greeks, and they have Zeus in there, and the city is a citadel. So Mattathias is trying to right that wrong. And now that Mattathias is dead, he's told his kids, you guys go and complete the job, finish the job. Okay. So then Judas, chapter 3, then Judas, his son, who was called Maccabeus, rose up in his place. His brothers all helped him, and everyone who had been allied with his father, and they fought the battle for Israel with gladness. And the eulogy here, he enlarged his people's glory and was clothed with a breastplate like a giant, and he girded on his weapons and waged war, sheltering the camp with his sword. He was like a lion in his deeds, like a young lion roaring for its prey. He pursued the lawless and searched them out, and he set on fire those who troubled his people. The lawless were humbled from fear of him, and all the works of lawlessness were troubled. For deliverance prospered by his hand, he embittered many rulers. He brought joy to Jacob by his deeds, and may his memory be blessed forever. He passed through the cities of Judah and destroyed the ungodly from the land, and he turned wrath away from Israel. His name was known to the ends of the earth, and he gathered those who were perishing. So this is important for many reasons, that eulogy. Several things there we recognize from Psalms and things like that, the roaring lion. May his memory be eternal. We've heard that before, right? The Orthodox Church did not create that line. They just carried it over from Judaism. You know, David's mentioned here. Mattathias is sort of made like a David. So you have a king who fails, but then is re-exalted. By this time, the concept of resurrection has become a Jewish concept. It's not foreign. So someone that dies can be raised. Here, the issue, and so David, spiritually dies and is raised. He becomes a messianic figure. The problem here is Mattathias dies and he's not raised. So they're introducing the fact that messianism may not necessarily be a raising. Okay, that's going to be important, obviously, because a couple hundred years later, somebody does die and rise from the dead. But the idea of dying and rising is still a part of Jewish thought when Jesus comes along. Okay. Verse 10, then Apollonius gathered the Gentiles together and brought a great army from Samaria to wage war with Israel. So again, we didn't have the troops to do it before. It has to come from a larger area and bring more troops in to put down this rebellion. But Judas knew it and went out to meet him. He struck and killed him, and many wounded fell, and the rest fled. They took their spoils, and Judas took the sword of Apollonius and fought with it every day. So the king has died, and the Jewish people are now gaining the upper hand. Now Saron, the leader of the army of Syria, heard Judas had gathered a large assembly of faithful men with him, and they were going out into battle. So he said, I will make a name for myself and be honored in the kingdom. I will fight Judas and his followers who despise the word of the king. He set forth, and with him went an army of godless men, strong enough to help him take vengeance on the sons of Israel. Of course, what happens when the king dies?
Oh, power grab. It's going to be a opportunistic.
In a unstable situation, that is exactly what happens. In a stable situation, the announcement is made, the king is dead, long live the king. There is no separation. There's always a king. Every second, there's no separation from king to king. Even though the coronation hasn't happened, the king still lives. I'll use American history for that. President Reagan gets shot. What's at the press conference? What's the scandal? Who's running the government? Who's the king? The king is not dead, might be dead. They didn't know. Who's the king? And of course, the one guy famously comes up and says, I'm in charge of the government. It's like, hey, you are now fired. You didn't last long by saying that. So even in America, then we had to rewrite our code to address what happens when the president is incapacitated. And we did that. But this is so this just tells you Apollonius dies, the king is dead, and like you said, there's not a lot of cohesiveness. He did all these things to create unity, and there's complete disunity. So now there's a power grab. There's people like, oh, I'll make a name for myself. So verse 16, so he drew near to the highlands of Beth Horon, uh, and Judas went out to meet him with only a few allies. As they saw the army coming to meet them, they said to Judas, how will we, being few, be able to fight against such a powerful number? We who have come out today are weak from lack of food. Then Judas said, it is easy to hem in many at the hands of a few, and it makes no difference before heaven to save with many or with few. For victory in battle does not come from the size of the army, but from the might of heaven. These come against us in the abundance of insolence and lawlessness, to seize us and our women and children, and to take spoils from us. But we are fighting for our lives and our laws. God himself will crush them from before our face. But as for you, do not fear because of them. Harkens back to again the kingdoms, David, who's helping him fight Goliath, God. All the victories he has, don't worry, we have God on our side. We have the prophets, and sometimes the prophets say, well, God's not going to be on your side. You're not going to be so successful. Sometimes they listen and don't go to battle. Sometimes they don't listen. They go to battle and they die. So again, the Jewish understanding that it doesn't matter how big or small we are, God's on our side. We will be victorious. When he was through speaking, Judas suddenly rushed against them, and Saron and his army were destroyed before him. He pursued him into the descent of Beth Horon as far as the plain. Around 800 of their soldiers perished. The remainder fled into the land of the Philistines. Then fear of Judas and his brothers began, and terror fell upon the nations around them. So his fame reached the king, and the Gentiles talked about the battles of Judas. So the rebellion is in full swing now, and he's gaining fame. And just like in any rebellion, American Revolution, as soon as people realized there was a revolution, it became guerrilla warfare. People came out of their homes. That's why we have the Second Amendment to arm the populace to fight against the British. The Greek Revolution, Kalavrita, to begin the revolution, but it is like a flame through Greece, and they kick out the Turks. So again, very standard way that a successful rebellion works, I should say. 27, when Antiochus the king heard these words, he was very angry, and he sent and gathered all the forces of his kingdom, an exceedingly strong army. He also opened the treasury and gave a year's wages to the troops and commanded them to be ready for any need. Then he noticed the silver in the treasury was depleted, and the taxes from the region were small. Because of the dissension and misfortune he caused in the land when he took away the laws that existed from the earlier days. So he took care not to pay out expenditures and give gifts as abundantly as he had done before, even more lavishly than the previous kings. He was very disturbed in himself, so he decided to go to Persia and collect taxes from those regions and gather abundant silver.
Clarification. Antiochus versus whoever the other guy is.
Apollonius.
Apollonius. Was Antiochus the heir, or was he the actual king?
Sorry, Apollonius was a general.
Oh, okay.
So, but Antiochus, here's the problem. You're waging war. Well, prior to the waging war, you've upset everybody. So people aren't as willing to pay taxes. You know, so the treasury is depleted. He was a very generous king. He was lavishly spending his money, but now he needs to raise money because he's got an uprising. He needs to get troops. He gets mercenaries, and he realizes I have no money. So now he's got to go to Persia to collect taxes. Well, how do you collect taxes? By force, right? I mean, this is what we do. Even in America, you collect taxes by force. The problem now is you start to get spread thin. You have too many things going on, and you don't have the unity again within your empire. So where were we? 32. He left Lysias, a man of distinction from royal lineage, in charge of all the king's affairs, from the river Euphrates to the boundary of Egypt. He was also to take care of his son Antiochus until his return. Then he handed over to Lysias half of the armies and the elephants. He gave him orders concerning all his wishes and concerning those who lived in Judea and Jerusalem. He ordered him to send an army against them to destroy them and remove the might of Israel and the remnant of Jerusalem and to remove their memory from that place. He was also to settle for foreigners in all of their regions and distribute their land by lot. Then the king took half of the remaining armies and left Antioch, the capital of his kingdom. In the 147th year, he crossed over the Euphrates River and entered the regions on the other side. So he split his armies up. Never a really good way to do things. Multi-front front wars, battles tend to be disastrous for the ones fighting them. Lysias appointed Ptolemy, son of Dorimenes, and Nicanor and Gorgias, valiant men who were loyal to the king. And he sent with them 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry to go into the region of Judah and crush it according to the king's orders. So he set out with the whole army, and they went and camped near Emmaus on the plain. When the merchants of the region heard about them, they took a very large amount of silver and gold and shackles and went into the camp to obtain the sons of Israel as slaves. The army of Syria and the land of the Philistines joined them as well. So fairly, even though the armies are split, there's still a fairly large group of people going towards where the Jewish people, the Israelites, are. Now Judas and his brothers saw that evil events were increasing and their armies were encamped at their borders. They learned also the words of the king, which he ordered to bring destruction and annihilation on the people. So each man said to his neighbor, "Let us prepare the ruin of our people and battle for our people and the sanctuary." Then the assembly gathered to prepare for battle and to pray and ask God for mercy and compassion. Jerusalem was uninhabited like a desert. No one brought products in or took them out, and the sanctuary had been trampled down. The sons of foreigners were in the citadel, a lodging place for the Gentiles. Gladness was taken from Jacob, and flute and harp played no more. They assembled and went to Mizpah, opposite Jerusalem. Because of a former time, Mizpah was a place of prayer and in Israel, and it goes back to the kingdoms where we read that. They fasted on that day and put on sackcloth, sprinkled ashes upon their head, and tore their garments. They opened the book of the law to look into those matters about which the Gentiles consulted the likeness of their idols. They also carried the priestly garments and the first fruits and the tithe, and they stirred up the Nazarites who had finished their days. Then they cried aloud to heaven, saying, "What do we do with these, and where will we take them? Your sanctuary has been trampled down and defiled, and your priests are in mourning and humiliated. Behold, the Gentiles have gathered against us to destroy us. You know that they plan against us. How will we be able to stand against them if you will not help us?" So their prayer for deliverance from God. So kind of clear. Then they blew the trumpet and cried out with a loud shout. After this, Judas appointed rulers for the people, leaders for the thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens. He ordered those who were building houses or were betrothed to women or were growing vineyards or were afraid to return each one to his own home according to the law. And again, the law allowed for you not to do military service if you had any of those things. Okay, so in fact, the parable of the great banquet in the Gospels, where the king says, he puts on a great banquet and he goes and invites these people in time of the banquet, and they start making excuses. I've just gotten married. I just bought a land. I just bought a cow. They were following the letter of the law. They were allowed to be excused because the law allowed for them to be excused from the banquet. So, however, of course, the banquet is the Eucharist, and there really isn't a whole lot of good excuses for missing the Eucharist. So that's what Jesus is saying. Then the army departed and set up camp south of Emmaus. Judas said to them, "Be ready at dawn to fight with these Gentiles who have gathered against us to destroy us and our sanctuary. For it is better for us to die in war than to look upon evils that the Gentiles would bring to us and the sanctuary. But as God's will is in heaven, so he will do." So basically, this is kind of the Israelites' last stand, if you will, as they're going to fight the Greeks. what was it there? Again, God's will be done, but it's better for us to die than to be in this captivity and to not be able to follow the law. Again, going back to the Greek Revolution, there were the women that threw themselves off the cliffs in order to not be, raped and plundered, and committed suicide. People say, well, how can you as Orthodox exalt that, say that that's a good thing? Suicide's a bad thing. So, well, part of the problem was, the Janissaries, a famous Turkish, many of them were Greeks or Armenians. They were Christians that had been stolen as children and brainwashed and turned into soldiers. So they were kind of protecting themselves in a similar manner as this, knowing what was to befall them. So, any questions? We are going to pause there since it's 7:51, chapter 3, and we'll pick up with chapter 4 next week. So mark this so I don't forget that.
In Greek, we call self-cause. So I had a hard time